President Lyndon B. Johnson, often thought of as the great modern emancipator. Liberals will praise this guy left and right. He pushed the 64 Civil Rights Act. He pushed the 65. This man was a racist through and through. That's right, I said it. I want you to listen to this 1964 phone call. It's Johnson speaking. 1964, he's in the White House. He's on the White House phone. It's taped as they used to do in those days. I found it on YouTube. And I want you to listen carefully. This man came out of Texas. And he has to find ways to show that, you know, poll taxes and literacy texts and so forth and so on are discriminatory. He's lamenting this because he says, in fact, the ends, I won't use it like Obama does, the ends are voting in bigger numbers than the whites. So how can I prove it's discriminatory, he says. I want you to listen to this. Start from the top. Go.
Say, well, you can't have a poll tax. They can say you can't have a gas tax or a cigarette tax or anything else. Federal government's telling the states pretty tough what their business is. Now, you can say that they can't discriminate, but I've got to prove that it discriminates, and I can't prove it in Texas. There are more voting there now than white folks. There are more buying poll taxes now than white folks. Higher percentage of them. And I can't show that the literacy test is discriminate against because they haven't got any.
No, I can't show that it's a problem. Because there's no discrimination, really. The Ners are voting more than the white folks. But then there's Woodrow Wilson, turn of the last century. The first great progressive. Now, we have buildings named after Woodrow Wilson. We have institutes named after Woodrow Wilson. We've got entire departments in Ivy League schools named after Woodrow Wilson. The Woodrow Wilson this and the Wilson Boulevard and Woodrow. What a great man he was. Oh, the League of Nations. Oh, you know, so forth and so on. Woodrow Wilson was a disgusting racist. Anybody takes the time to look at it, he was a disgusting racist. Scholar after scholar after scholar has written about this. A couple of years back, professor at Boston University pointed this out. William Kaylor. Among other things, he wrote, born in Virginia and raised in Georgia and South Carolina. By the way, is this boring, everybody? I mean, I can talk about meatballs, or I can go on and on about what's the next statue we need to ban and who's good and who's bad. No. This is a history lesson. It's history time, baby. Real history. Born in Virginia and raised in Georgia and South Carolina, Woodrow Wilson was a loyal son of the Old South who regretted the outcome of the Civil War. He used his high office to reverse some of its consequences. When he entered the White House 100 years ago, Washington was rigidly a segregation town, except for the federal government, except for federal agencies. They had been integrated during the post-war Reconstruction period, enabling African Americans to obtain federal jobs and work side by side with whites in government agencies. Well, Wilson couldn't have that, see? Wilson promptly authorized members of his cabinet to reverse this long-standing policy of racial integration in the federal civil service. So what the Republicans had done, the first big-time progressive Democrat undid. Cabinet heads, such as his son-in-law, Secretary of the Treasury William McAdoo of Tennessee, resegregated facilities, such as restrooms and cafeterias in these federal buildings. In some federal offices, screens were required to be set up to separate white and black workers. African Americans found it difficult to secure high-level civil service positions, which some had held under previous Republican administrations. Why won't the media report any of this? Well, we know why. A delegation of black professionals led by Monroe Trotter, a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Harvard and a Boston newspaper editor, appeared at the White House to protest these new policies. But Woodrow Wilson treated them rudely and declared that, quote, segregation is not a humiliation but a benefit, and ought to be so regarded by you gentlemen, unquote. The novel, The Klansman, by Thomas Dixon, a longtime political supporter, friend, and former classmate of Wilson's at Johns Hopkins University, was published in 1905. A decade later, with Woodrow Wilson in the White House, cinematographer D.W. Griffith produced a motion picture version of that book titled Birth of a Nation, with quotations from Wilson's scholarly writings in its subtitles. The silent film denounced the Reconstruction period in the South, when blacks briefly held elective office in several states. It hailed the rise of the Ku Klux Klan as a sign of Southern white society's recovery from the humiliation and suffering to which the federal government and the Northern carpetbaggers, quote-unquote, had subjected it after the defeat in Civil War. The film depicted African Americans, mostly played by white actors in blackface, as uncouth, uncivilized, and rabble. The Democrat Party celebrates Woodrow Wilson. Celebrates him. Just as they celebrated Robert Byrd and made a majority leader in the United States Senate. Now, while the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People publicly denounced the movie's blatant appeals to racial prejudice, Woodrow Wilson organized a private screening of his friend's film in the White House for members of his cabinet and their families. Quote, "It is like writing history with lightning," Wilson observed. "My only regret is that it is all so terribly true." So we're going to take down those signs, those Woodrow Wilson schools. We're going to change their names. I ask all my northern friends, our friends in New England, our friends in the northern states, our friends in the Atlantic region states, the Woodrow Wilson Institute. Aren't you ashamed? Well, you might as well hang the Confederate flag on that building. Pathetic. Disgusting. There's tons more on this man who was pathetic and disgusting. And by the way, even over at Huffington Post some time ago, 2011, there's a quote in Ron Kessler's book, Inside the White House, involving, among others, LBJ. And here's a quote from LBJ to two governors on Air Force One. Ready for this one? "I'll have those N-word voting Democratic for the next 200 years, quote unquote. I'll have those N-word voting Democratic for the next 200 years, quote unquote. Lyndon Johnson to two governors on Air Force One. I'll have those N'ers voting Democratic for the next 200 years. This is why I am repulsed when Obama used that word. It is a word of lowlives. And I don't care, blacks said to blacks, blacks said to... It's the word of lowlives. And no, I don't believe in censorship. But I do believe in self-control. You're going to ban the Confederate flag and celebrate the N-word? The hell is that? The Democrat Party became strongest, you know when? To try to take out Abraham Lincoln. And by the way, not just the South, up there in the North, when Lincoln ran for re-election in 1864 against McClellan, the general, among others, who he fired, McClellan was a native of New Jersey. And guess what? New Jersey voted for McClellan, not for Lincoln. Just thought I'd mention that too. But there's even a bigger issue here. The entire progressive movement. This movement imported from Europe, just like Marxism imported from Europe, Fabian socialism imported from Europe, all these horrific things, these ideologies, these philosophies that have resulted in untold human misery. Even Nazism with the neo-Nazis, imported from Europe. This entire progressive movement has gotten away. We're pretending it's for the people. We're pretending it's compassionate. We're pretending it's humane.